March 14, 1945. Ohrdruf, Thuringia, Germany. The body was found at 0600 hours, frozen in the snow beside Track 7. Major Wilhelm Hartmann, 43, Reichsbahn logistics officer, formerly of the 6th Panzer Division. His service pistol lay 3 meters from his right hand. The single bullet wound entered beneath his chin and exited through the crown of his skull. The coroner would later note that his eyes were open, fixed on something in the direction of the eastern rail yard. But what disturbed the SS investigators most was not the wound or the weapon. It was his logbook, clutched so tightly in his left hand that they had to break 2 fingers to retrieve it. The final entry, written in trembling script just hours before his death, read only this: "God forgive us, it must never arrive." 3 days earlier, on March 11th, a train had departed from the underground facility beneath Ohrdruf concentration camp. The manifest listed 37 rail cars. The witnesses would later swear they counted 41. The locomotive was a Kriegslok BR-52, engine number 8173, one of thousands built for the Eastern Front. Black smoke, steel wheels, nothing remarkable about it at all, except for one detail that appeared in Hartmann's earlier logs. The train weighed 740 tons more than its cargo manifest could account for. The official shipping order, stamped by SS Obergruppenführer Hans Kammler himself, designated the cargo as scientific equipment and documentation bound for the Führer bunker in Berlin. Priority, absolute. Escort, Waffen-SS, 12th Panzer Division, 4 armored cars, 60 armed guards. No stops, no inspections. Radio silence enforced. The train was to travel only at night through secondary routes, avoiding all major stations. Estimated arrival in Berlin, March 18, 1945. It never arrived. The first Allied intelligence report came from a Polish resistance cell near Gera on March 12th. A radio operator named Stefan Kowalski transmitted a brief, frantic message to London before his signal went dead. Heavy train, SS escort, moving northwest through Thuringia. Unusual radiation readings near rail cars. Geiger counters off scale. Advise. The transmission ended mid-sentence. Kowalski's body was found 2 days later in a ditch, shot twice in the back of the head. By March 15th, the train had vanished. German military communications from that week, declassified in 1998, reveal a pattern of confusion and panic. Reichsbahn dispatch in Erfurt reported the train passing through at 0200 hours on March 13, but Weimar Station, just 23 kilometers north, had no record of its arrival. Leipzig Control Tower logged a sighting at 0430 hours the same night, yet the route made no sense. Leipzig was 112 kilometers off course, heading northeast instead of northwest toward Berlin. Then the sightings stopped altogether. SS Standartenführer Otto Brenner, who commanded the train's escort, sent his last radio message at 0447 hours from a location he identified as 7 kilometers south of Dessau. The message, recorded by Wehrmacht Signals Intelligence and entered into evidence at Nuremberg, contained only 11 words. Track ahead destroyed. Heavy fog. Orders unclear. Awaiting instructions. Something is wrong. No further communication was ever received. On March 16th, a Luftwaffe reconnaissance flight in a Messerschmitt Bf-109G-14 was diverted to search the rail corridor between Erfurt and Berlin. The pilot, Lieutenant Franz Adler,
reported finding a section of track near the village of Bitterfeld that appeared to have been subjected to extreme heat. The rails had warped, the wooden ties were scorched black, but there was no sign of explosion, no bomb craters, no wreckage, just heat. Adler's gun camera footage, recovered from Soviet archives in 2003, shows a half-kilometer stretch of twisted steel curving into a forest. At the forest edge, barely visible through the trees, something large and dark rests among the birches. When ground units reached the site on March 18th, they found the locomotive. Engine 8173 sat motionless 340 meters off the main track, embedded nose first into a ravine. The boiler was cold, the firebox was empty, the engineer and firemen were gone, but the cabin showed no signs of struggle, no blood, no damage. Their logbook sat open on the control panel. The final entry, timed at 0520 hours, March 13, read, "Speed reduced to 15 kilometers per hour, visibility 0, brakes unresponsive. We are not where we should be." Behind the locomotive, the rail cars stretched back into the forest in a perfect line, as if the train had simply rolled off the track and come gently to rest. But 37 cars were accounted for. 4 were missing, and the soldiers who had escorted the train, all 60 of them, were gone. Not dead, not captured, gone. Their weapons lay in neat stacks beside the rail line. Their helmets hung from tree branches. Their boots were arranged in pairs along the embankment, laces still tied. Inside the remaining cars, investigators found scientific equipment, crates of documents, and something else, instrument panels with dials and switches labeled in German technical script, thick lead-lined containers stamped with warnings in 3 languages, and in the center of one car, bolted to a reinforced steel platform, a cylindrical device, approximately 2.3 meters in length. The markings on its side were partially obscured, but 3 words were still legible. Uranmaschine, Projekt Thor, 1945. Mark Hartmann's logbook, analyzed by Allied intelligence after Germany's surrender, contained entries spanning 7 months. In them, he documented something he called the Thor shipments, materials moved in secret from facilities across Germany to Ohrdruf, heavy water from Norway, refined uranium from Czechoslovakia, prototype components from laboratories he identified only by code names. In his entry from March 10th, the day before the train departed, he wrote, "They have done it. Kammler believes it is ready, but I have seen the tests. I have seen what it does. This is not a weapon. This is the end of everything." As the sun set on March 18, 1945, deep in the forest near Bitterfeld, a recovery team began the work of inventorying the train's remaining cargo. At 1847 hours, a young Wehrmacht corporal named Hans Müller opened one of the lead-lined containers in the 6th railcar. The Geiger counter in his hand began to scream. He dropped the lid and stepped back, his face pale in the fading light. The officer beside him asked what he had seen inside. Müller's voice, recorded in the unit's log, was barely a whisper. "It's warm, it's glowing, and it's still ticking."
March 19th, 1945. 1100 hours, Soviet 1st Ukrainian Front, 47 kilometers east of Bitterfeld. The order came directly from Stavka in Moscow. Marshal Georgy Zhukov himself signed it. A specialized detachment of the NKVD, accompanied by 2 Soviet physicists, was to proceed immediately to the coordinates provided by partisan intelligence. They were to secure the site, document everything, and under no circumstances allow Western Allied forces to reach it first.
The code name for the operation was Molnia, lightning. Captain Dmitry Volkov led the detachment. He had fought at Stalingrad, survived the siege of Leningrad, and seen horrors that would haunt him until his death in 1989. But nothing in his war prepared him for what he found in that forest. The German recovery team was still there, frozen in place like statues. 14 men, sitting or standing around the rail cars, their eyes open, their faces turned toward the sixth car. None of them responded when the Soviets approached. They were breathing, their hearts were beating, but they would not speak, would not move, would not acknowledge the world around them. It was as if their minds had simply stopped. Corporal Mueller, the young soldier who had opened the container, sat on the ground with his back against a tree, the Geiger counter still clutched in his hands, its needle pinned at maximum. The two Soviet physicists, Dr. Anatoly Fedorov and Irina Petrova, had been pulled from their work at Laboratory No. 2 in Moscow, the secret facility where Soviet scientists were racing to understand atomic fission. They had been told only that they were needed to examine advanced German technology. When they stepped inside the sixth railcar and saw what rested on that steel platform, Fedorov went silent for a full minute. Then he turned to Volkov and said, in a voice that the captain would never forget, "We need to bury this, now, all of it, and everyone who has seen it needs to understand that they saw nothing." But by then, it was already too late. The Americans arrived at 14:30 hours. A forward reconnaissance unit from the 69th Infantry Division, led by Lieutenant James Donovan of Brooklyn, New York. They had been tracking German movements through the region and had intercepted Soviet radio traffic about a priority recovery operation near Bitterfeld. Donovan was 24 years old, 3 weeks from going home, and absolutely unprepared for what he stumbled into. Years later, in a deposition given to the CIA in 1963, Donovan described the scene. The Soviets had set up a perimeter. They weren't hostile, but they weren't friendly either. There was this tension in the air, like everyone was afraid of something they couldn't see. I remember seeing these German soldiers just sitting there, not moving, not talking. And I remember the sound. There was this low hum coming from inside one of the rail cars. Not mechanical, something else. It made my teeth hurt. Fedorov and Petrova were still inside the car when Donovan's men arrived. Through the open door, Donovan glimpsed what he would later describe as something that looked like a bomb, but wrong. Too complex, too deliberate. He saw cables and tubes running from the central cylinder to smaller devices arranged in a circle. He saw instrument panels covered in German script and mathematical symbols. And he saw the glow, a faint blue-green luminescence emanating from the containers, pulsing slowly like a heartbeat. The standoff lasted 3 hours, neither side willing to fire, but neither side willing to leave. Volkov and Donovan communicated through a German prisoner who spoke both English and Russian. The conversation, documented in both Soviet and American archives, was tense and circular. The Americans wanted to know what the cargo was. The Soviets insisted it was German equipment now under Soviet jurisdiction. Donovan argued that Bitterfeld would likely fall within the American occupation zone once Germany surrendered. Volkov countered that possession was 9/10 of the law, especially in war. Then, at 17:21 hours, the decision was made for them. Dr. Petrova emerged from the railcar, her face ashen, her hands trembling. She spoke rapidly to Fedorov in Russian. Donovan couldn't understand the words, but he understood the fear in her voice. Fedorov immediately turned to Volkov and said something that made the captain's expression change from stubborn resolve to genuine alarm. Volkov ordered an immediate evacuation. Everyone, Soviet and American alike, to move back at least 500 meters. When Donovan demanded an explanation, Volkov looked him in the eye and said in broken English, is not stable, is getting worse. We must go, now." They ran, all of them. Soviet soldiers, American infantry, German prisoners, scientists, everyone, through the forest, away from the train, their boots crashing through underbrush as the sun dipped below the horizon. Behind them, the hum grew louder, deeper, resonating through the trees like a living thing. At 18:04 hours, the forest erupted with light. Not an explosion, no shockwave, no fire, no blast, just light. A brilliant, searing, blue-white radiance that turned night into day for 7 full seconds. Soldiers 3 kilometers away would later report seeing it through the trees, a flash so bright that it burned afterimages into their vision. The Geiger counters carried by both Soviet and American units all went dead in the same instant, their circuits overloaded and destroyed. When the light faded, the forest was dark again, silent. The hum was gone. And when recovery teams cautiously returned to the site 2 hours later, they found something impossible. The train was gone. Not destroyed, not scattered, gone. The rail cars, the locomotive, the equipment, the glowing containers, everything. The ravine where engine 1873 had come to rest was empty. The tracks that had led into the forest ended abruptly in a perfect circle of scorched earth, 85 meters in diameter. Within that circle, nothing remained. No metal fragments, no ash, no residue. The ground itself looked different, darker, as if the soil had been compressed or altered at a molecular level. The 14 German soldiers were still there, unchanged, unaware. They would remain in that catatonic state for the rest of their lives, confined to various psychiatric facilities across occupied Germany. None of them ever spoke again. In the center of the circle, driven into the ground like a grave marker, was a single object. Major Wilhelm Hartmann's pistol, the one that had been found beside his body in Ohrdruf 5 days earlier. Volkov picked it up, examined it, and found something that made his blood run cold. Scratched into the handle, in fresh marks that hadn't been there before, were 4 numbers, 1952. The site was immediately classified. Soviet troops cordoned off the entire area. American units were ordered to fall back and submit to a joint security protocol. Both governments, still technically allies, agreed to seal all records related to the incident. The official story, entered into both Soviet and American military logs, stated only that a German munitions train had been located and neutralized. No further details were provided. But the witnesses knew better, and the witnesses began to disappear. Lieutenant Donovan returned to the United States in May 1945. In 1947, he was recruited by Army intelligence for a classified debriefing about his experiences in Germany. He never returned home from that meeting. His family was told he had died in a training accident. His body was never recovered. Dr. Anatoly Fedorov was recalled to Moscow in April 1945. He was last seen entering Lubyanka prison on April 23rd. His colleague, Dr. Irina Petrova, vanished 3 days later. Neither was ever heard from again. Captain Dmitry Volkov survived the war and returned to his family in Leningrad. In 1951, he began writing a memoir about his experiences. On November 3, 1952, exactly 7 years after the incident in the forest, he suffered a massive heart attack and died instantly. He was 36 years old, in perfect health. The manuscript of his memoir was never found. Of the 43 Soviet and American personnel who were present at Bitterfeld on March 19, 1945, 31 died under unusual circumstances before 1955. Heart attacks, car accidents, suicides, disappearances. The other 12 spent the rest of their lives looking over their shoulders, jumping at shadows, speaking in whispers about things they could never prove.
November 3rd, 1952. 0247 hours, Bitterfeld, East Germany. The call came in to the East German People's Police from a railway worker named Ernst Zimmer. His voice was shaking so badly the dispatcher could barely understand him. He reported that a train was sitting on the tracks 2 kilometers south of Bitterfeld Station. An old train, a wartime locomotive, and it hadn't been there 20 minutes ago. By 0320 hours, the site was swarming with Stasi agents and Soviet military personnel. What they found defied every rational explanation. The locomotive BR-52, engine number 8173, sat on tracks that hadn't been used since 1946. Behind it, 37 rail cars stretched into the darkness, perfectly aligned, perfectly intact. The locomotive's boiler was warm. Steam rose from its stack into the cold November air. The firebox glowed with active coals. But there was no crew, no engineers, no guards, just the train, sitting there as if it had simply rolled out of the past and stopped. Inside the rail cars, everything was exactly as it had been 7 years earlier. The equipment, the documents, the lead-lined containers, and in the 6th car, on its reinforced platform, the device, the Uranmaschine, still glowing, still humming, still ticking. But something was different. Something was wrong. Carved into the walls of every rail car, in dozens of languages, were messages, warnings, written in Russian, German, English, Polish, French, Chinese, some in scripts that analysts couldn't immediately identify. The same message repeated over and over: do not open, do not use, for the love of God, do not let them finish. And beneath each message, a signature, not names, but dates: April 12, 1961, October 16, 1962, August 6, 1991, September 11, 2001. Dates that hadn't happened yet, dates that were still ahead in the future. The Soviet commander on site, Colonel Yuri Andropov, later to become head of the KGB, ordered an immediate lockdown. Every person who had seen the train was detained. The rail cars were loaded onto trucks under cover of darkness and transported to a facility near Moscow. The locomotive was dismantled, its parts scattered across 3 different storage depots. The tracks where the train had appeared were torn up and replaced. But before the train was moved, one man entered the 6th car alone. His name has been redacted from every document. His rank, his assignment, even his nationality remain classified. What is known, from fragments of reports that have leaked over the decades, is that he spent 14 minutes inside that car. When he emerged, his hair had turned completely white. He was 29 years old. He wrote a single report, 8 pages long, and delivered it personally to both Soviet Premier Georgy Malenkov and U.S. President Harry Truman through back channels that had been established for exactly this kind of crisis. The report has never been declassified. But 3 months after it was delivered, both superpowers abruptly halted certain lines of weapons research. Funding was cut, facilities were closed, scientists were reassigned. No official explanation was ever given. In that report, according to a former CIA analyst who claimed to have seen it in 1978 before suffering a fatal accident in 1979, the unnamed officer described what he called evidence of temporal recursion.
He theorized that the device on the train hadn't been a weapon in any conventional sense. It was a machine designed to create what he termed probability collapse, a way to reach back through time and alter specific events by collapsing the wave function of past decisions. The Germans, he wrote, had been attempting to change the outcome of the war by retroactively preventing key Allied victories. But something had gone wrong during the train's journey in 1945. The device had activated prematurely, creating a loop, trapping the train and its cargo in a closed temporal curve. For 7 years, the train had existed outside of normal space-time, caught between what was and what might have been. And when it finally returned, it brought with it evidence of other timelines, other histories, other versions of the future. The messages carved into the railcar walls weren't from the past. They were from the future, from people who had lived through the consequences of what the device could do. They were warnings from timelines that no longer existed, or perhaps existed in parallel, or perhaps were fighting to prevent themselves from ever existing at all. Among the documents recovered from the train was a notebook belonging to an SS scientist named Dr. Klaus Adler, Lieutenant Franz Adler's brother. It contained equations, diagrams, and a final entry dated March 13, 1945 at 5:15 a.m., 5 minutes before the train vanished. In it, he wrote, "The mathematics are elegant, but the implications are terrifying. We sought to create a weapon that could rewrite history. Instead, we have created something that allows history to rewrite itself. If we proceed, causality itself becomes meaningless. Every action, every decision, every moment becomes mutable. Nothing would be real. Nothing would be permanent. We would exist in a state of infinite revision, ghosts editing our own existence." He ended the entry with a single sentence: "I have sabotaged the containment fields. May God have mercy on us all." The device was never activated. It couldn't be. The sabotage Dr. Adler had implemented had worked, but only partially. The machine had entered a state of permanent instability, unable to fully activate, but also unable to shut down. It existed in a quantum superposition, simultaneously functional and broken, present and absent, then and now. Soviet scientists spent 6 years studying it before concluding it was too dangerous to continue. In 1958, the device was placed in a specially constructed vault 400 meters beneath the Ural Mountains, encased in 7 meters of lead and concrete, surrounded by Faraday cages and electromagnetic damping fields. It remains there to this day, still glowing, still humming, still ticking, counting down to a moment that may have already happened, or may never happen at all, or may be happening right now, somewhere, in a version of history where different choices were made and different trains reached different destinations. Major Wilhelm Hartmann's final words echo through the decades. It must never arrive. But where it was going, and whether it ever truly left, remains a question we are perhaps better off never answering. Some doors should stay closed. Some trains should never reach their destination. And some cargo should remain lost, forever trapped between the world that was and the world that could have been, a ghost of possibility haunting the edges of history, waiting in the darkness of might have been.